Welcome back to the Adoption in Focus podcast. In today's episode, we're joined by Alex, a single adopter who generously shares her experience of welcoming an older child into her life. From the realities of introductions, school transitions, and navigating contact, to balancing work, identity, and self-care, Alex offers an honest and thoughtful reflection on what adoption can really look like. So, Alex, what initially drew you to adopting an older child? And how did you prepare yourself for welcoming a 5+-year-old into your life?
So I knew I didn't want to adopt a baby. And I also knew that a lot of adopters, a preference would be to have a younger child. And I think because I was going into it as a single adopter anyway, from many reasons, including childcare costs and the cost of nurseries and things, and on one income, it made more sense I was kind of looking at age 3 and above. So that made the most sense to me. But also because of the job I do in health anyway, I also, in my head, it kind of made sense to adopt an older child because you'd have more of an understanding of their history and background, which with a baby, you may not know everything. I mean, my thoughts on that may have changed slightly now, but that is kind of part of the reason why I did it as well.
That makes perfect sense. You can have chats with a 5-year-old that you can't with a baby, can't you? So that makes perfect sense. This is a big question, I think, really. But in adopting an older child, your son, was there anything that surprised you, and that can be positively, or things that challenged you about that?
Things with so obviously because my son was older than 5 as well, but what things that surprised me was how unprepared he was for the adoption and the placement to happen, even though there was plenty of time for that. And after having the being granted, for matching, there was quite a significant time gap before we started introductions, and the whole point of that was to prepare him, but he was not prepared at all, really. So that surprised me because I thought that would have been done better. And then other things that sort of surprised me was nobody tells you that, obviously with an older child who can talk, that they may tell you every day for a minimum of 6 months that they hate you, don't want to live with you, and want to leave multiple times a day. And I think that was quite hard to sort of hear that day in, day out, all the time.
Yeah.
When you're trying to do everything to sort of build a bond and meet their needs. And I think that was quite difficult. It also surprised me just the process in general with introductions, because obviously in the training you're very much said how your introductions is child-led, and your child will be at their foster carer's house and then spend time with you at your house before they move in. But that didn't happen in the introductions we had, so it wasn't at their home, and the introductions got moved further away, and it ended up being a very, very long drive with me and my child at the end of introductions, which was a very exhausting way to start, to be honest, and probably wasn't realistically the most sensible way, but was the option given.
Wow. That sounds really difficult, Alex. Really difficult.
It wasn't easy, but I think it just made things more challenging, because having never ever been to the house, and then it's like, voila, here's your new home, enjoy. Even though there was like a photo book, that's still a lot for a child of that age to manage. So it did mean it was quite a difficult start, and they weren't, it was probably quite a bit of a shock to them as well, because of where they moved from to where they were was very culturally different as well. So that would have probably had an impact on them as well and been a bit of a shock to the system.
It's such a huge transition, isn't it, in so many ways?
Definitely.
Wow. You kind of touched on this a little bit at the start, but a lot of single adopters find that they need to reduce their hours or change their job entirely once their child or children come home. How did your adoption, if you don't mind me asking, impact your career and your financial planning?
So it's made a big difference. So I was working full time before my son moved in, and then I had about 10 months off in the end because although they were in school, obviously it takes a lot of time for them to settle, and for me to go back to work, they would need to be in before and after school club. So originally at the start, when I went back, my son would have had quite a long day because I would have dropped them in at 7:30 and I would have picked them up at about 10 to 6. But at least, 4 days a week at least anyway. And I worked 35 hours a week. Yeah, it was tiring for everybody, really. And it was the thing that Matt worked well, though, for my son was he worked well doing the before school club because it was a transition and it coped much better in school. So school actually funded a place on a Friday morning for a shorter session in the morning because they noticed the difference in school, and also it just worked better from a home point of view doing that. So that was really helpful in primary school. I did then drop my hours a little bit, and then I dropped them again when he was in year 6, for many reasons, partly because I think I'd almost probably reached a bit of burnout. I hadn't been very well anyway, and I then was able to pick him up slightly earlier. So instead of, an hour earlier, actually made a huge amount of difference. And then just before going to secondary school, I realised there was no before and after school club. I couldn't drop my hours at work because of the grade that I was at. I would have had to have dropped a pay grade to be able to drop down to 3 days, which wasn't financially suitable at all. So I actually ended up leaving and work for myself in the same job role, but now I work for myself. So I could be more flexible, but at the moment that's quite new. So I only started that in August. So it's a case of building up your work and job and everything. And so I am around more, but also it does, from a financial point of view, there is implications at the moment, but it also, because I can't work as many hours, so I can't do any of the after school, and lots of families want after school appointments, and at the moment that's not something I can offer because although my child is now in secondary school, they're not somebody that I could leave home alone for a long time or anything. They need to have a support, and as soon as it gets dark they wouldn't want to be at home on their own at all.
There's so many things to think about, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. There's lots of things that you wouldn't have thought of at the time. So you would think, secondary school, you can come in, be a bit late, it'd be fine. And actually, no, I can't. And it has to be planned.
But what you said is, I think you said you were reaching a point where you hadn't been very well and you were just at the point of burnout. But I think, I'm sorry that you were at that point. But being able to spot it in yourself and think, something's going to have to give somewhere.
Definitely.
That's so important to be able to do that, isn't it?
Well, otherwise you don't feel like you're doing your job to the best of your ability, and then you're not doing your home life to the best of your ability. I couldn't not work, and I know some families do. I don't know how I could do that because I wouldn't have money to pay the bills, so I wouldn't be able to pay my mortgage and things. So I think it's that, for me, having that sense of self as well. Like, I work really hard to get the job or the career that I have, and studying at university and things because I had to have that. And I wouldn't say I was the most academic person, but it was needed, so I got through it. And I just wouldn't want to give that up unless I really had to, because I think that's something else that you might not realise or think is because being in the profession where I would see children who actually are previously looked after and looked after children anyway, people just calling you mum when I'm like, I'm not your mum. My name, I've got a name, please use it. And I was always mindful of that anyway, but it's made me much more mindful at work to make sure that I call the parent their name, because actually they're not my mum, my dad. So I think that's something, because it is, well, maybe not for everyone, but I don't like it when I just get called mum by people, because I'm like, I'm not your mum.
I'm not. No, don't give me that responsibility.
Yeah, I've got a name. Please use my name. Because yes, I am a mum, but first and foremost, I am my own person as well.
And I get that, Alex, because identity is something that can be completely consumed by being a parent. But I think there are lots of other parts of you, aren't there? So that what you're saying, I think, will resonate with so many people.
Hopefully.
It will.
You don't want to be bored listening.
You're far from boring. You've talked about really the factors that helped you decide what to do in terms of your career and your role. So thank you really for sharing that, because I think you're right that it's often not something that we always necessarily think about going into the process. We can sometimes assume that older children come home with a more established sense of their self and their history, which you've kind of said maybe not for your son in terms of being prepared for adoption. But how did you approach with your son building trust and connection?
I mean, a lot of it was time. So giving him time. So I didn't rush to apply for the adoption order, and because I didn't want to apply for something when they didn't want to live with me. So I kind of wanted to wait for them to sort of feel maybe more settled, more safe. So that did take quite a while, because, it just, a lot had to happen before then. And it was just him knowing that I was always going to show up. You were always going to have food on the table. You were never going to be left on your own. You were never going to have to worry that I wouldn't be there, or that you'd wake up in the night and I wouldn't be there, because these were all legitimate worries and fears that he had. And a lot of the worries he had, he wasn't really able to express himself until maybe 6 months in. There was a few things that came out. So there was quite a lot of things that he sort of talked about, and some of them were quite like difficult things, because there were things where things needed to be raised and discussed with other services, of issues where potentially his needs weren't met when they should have been. So there was a lot of in the background, there was lots of me not only being the parent but also being like the firefighter to sort out all these other issues, as well as trying to sort out contact with birth family. And that was really difficult and a lot harder than I thought it would be, and has continued to be difficult ever since. And it's just feels a bit like a postcode lottery as to whether you end up getting contact with birth family, and it isn't always. So I always thought that it was because birth family just didn't have interest or didn't want to contact, and I've sort of found out more recently that isn't the case, and actually some of birth family had no idea about letterbox or how it would even be done, and weren't aware, at least more than 3. So that made it quite difficult, because you've sort of had that narrative where you're like, oh, well, they're not interested, and your son doesn't want you to do letterbox, and actually you're like, it's not that they haven't opted in because they haven't actually been asked to opt in. So we've had a lot of upset, I suppose, from my son, because he really wants contact with some of his birth family. So it's been trying to fight those battles as well, because he doesn't just want letterbox. He didn't want to write a letter. He lived with some of his siblings, so he wants to see them. So we do now see some of his siblings, one of which we saw for the first time, taken 4 years to sort to see them, and to have any form of letterbox was this year as well. So, but if I hadn't have pushed and thought that, which obviously my son won't know all of those things and he shouldn't, but it's quite time consuming to do all of those things and to organise contact. And then if for any reason somebody's unwell or you can't manage it and you need to reschedule, well, I can't then tell my son in advance that we might be meeting somebody, because even if it's a really valid reason, he can't deal with the rejection, but he's also so desperate to see his like other family members and siblings as well. So that's been something that's part of his sense of self and care, and it's something that he's really struggled with, because obviously in my family, so my siblings have got children, but they're not on their own. There's more than one child. So I think he really notices that, because he is on his own, but he isn't because he's got siblings. But that can be really complicated, when they know that you're a single adopter, and then you've got your son, and then they'll say something about so-and-so, and they live somewhere, and people are looking at you, and he won't divulge the rest of it, which makes me laugh. And it's people just look at you like, what? And he does things like that, and it does make me laugh. But yeah, because he'll just say, oh yeah, so-and-so sibling, and they live blah blah blah, and people are just like, what do you mean? And he may or may not disclose it, or just goes, yep, and walks off, and then they're looking at you like, have you got other children? I was like, no, I don't have any other children.
What were, you talked about you wanted to wait to get the adoption order until, your son was able to recognise that he did want to live with you. What were some of the early challenges for you, would you say, around school or routines? Or, you started to touch on those really. And as the only parent in the house, how do you navigate that on your own?
You just don't get a break. I think that's what's really difficult is the fact that you, especially if they're not sleeping, which I was quite lucky that I would say the first 2 weeks was just utter shell shock nightmare, probably for both of us. And then I had a nice little honeymoon period for 2 weeks, week 3 to 5, and then week 5 to 6 months was just I'm not going to lie, in that period of time, it would have been a high possibility of disrupting, because he was obviously he didn't want to be there, didn't really understand why he'd been uprooted from where he was and all of that. And then he's been put somewhere completely different. Everyone's got a different accent and all of that. And he's with all these strangers. And I think it would have been, all of that would have been hard anyway in itself. His social worker had changed again. So that there wasn't really any continuity apart from his IRO, who you wouldn't see that often anyway. So that would have been quite difficult, all of those things for him as well. So I suppose for me and managing it, it was just, you just had to, I got to a point where it was focusing on just getting through the day. And then it got to a point I was literally going, focus on the morning, focus on the afternoon. Because when they moved in, obviously everyone else his age was at school and he wasn't. And I had to wait a while before he could go to school, because he moved in probably about a month before the summer holidays. So you had all of that time, and so you're trying to do things. And I know it's you often sort of was talked about, staying at home and bonding. Well, that wouldn't have happened, because one, I wouldn't have had a house, and also they needed to move. So I had to go to a park or a playground or somewhere. I had to go out every single day, and there was no children his age to play with. So
that's hard.
that was quite difficult for the first, or at least the first month. And then the summer, just, like you're trying to meet up with people, but we had quite a few restrictions as well. So even if I had, say, wanted to have a minute to breathe for myself, because of the authority that he was from, they were very much like, anyone that your child might be without you has to have the DBS. You can't leave it. Just even like my parents had to have a DBS to even like have him, but also he didn't cope if I wasn't there either, because at least I was someone he knew. So then that made it tricky, and he'd just go places he wasn't meant to go. So you go somewhere and then you'd be like, where's he gone? And he's wandering off somewhere, or just asking any person, oh, can you do up my shoelace? Like, there just wasn't any like awareness of danger or anything. So you kind of like had to have eyes in the back of your head. Quite well.
Sounds exhausting.
Sometimes I still do, but it's slightly better now. But yeah, you did have to have a lot of eyes in your back of your head, especially at the start. So in having a break, I was just lucky at the very start that he did sleep well, so I could sort of have a break in the evening. But I could, not that you could go anywhere. And also it was COVID as well, so we were more limited. So
it sounds such a exhausting, isolating time, Alex, to be honest.
Yeah,
it really does.
COVID was I mean, I was lucky. Well, I suppose I had to isolate to start introductions, actually.
Did you really?
Yeah, because even when I started my like adoption training, it just moved on to virtual. So because you did it. So my brother was going to come to the first day with me when it was 3 days, but because it had moved to virtual, he couldn't, because he wasn't allowed in my house, because obviously living alone, it was just me. So that was it also didn't help that one last sort of bit of anything you could do pre becoming a parent, we were in lockdown.
Yeah.
Not that I
so
regret that or resent anything, but it was like,
no, but you didn't.
Yeah. One last hurrah, have my birthday, all of that. And it was like, oh, let's have lockdown instead. You'll be in that. So yeah, that was it was a bit unique, but yeah, but we managed it.
You did. And you got through it, and you're here. So that's
still here 4 years later. One house move, a school change for secondary.
That's not too bad though, is it? Compared to how you're saying, what it could have looked like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm too stubborn. So, and also for me, it's true, I'm too stubborn. And also for me, with the whole thing, that even though it has been extremely challenging and actually is, it's the whole like, well, what, for me, it was always, well, if that happened, like say talking about disruption, well, what would happen to him? Because that would be, and that's what would always stop me. And I know for some families and that it, will ultimately be whatever the right decision is for whatever family. But for me, it was very much that, well, where would they go? How would that impact him? Because he's already had other failures. I just thought I can't do that to him. But yeah. And then, we'll be hitting the teenage years soon. That could be a whole different story.
That'll be a whole new podcast. What does, Alex, if you get the opportunity to do this, what does self-care look like now compared to before you adopted?
So before I adopted, self-care would be probably meeting up with my friends, probably going to the cinema with my friends, maybe a drink, I used to play rugby as well. So yeah, and staying active and just being busy. I liked time on my own, but I also like to be social. But I'd be the sort of person I'd want to do like an escape room or mud run. Especially with groups. Okay. I'm not going to go and do a mud run on my own. Absolutely not. But if it's for charity or with people. So we used to do a lot of things like that. Whereas now self-care is, for quite a while, was completely non-existent, because apart from it was like, well, I can watch something I want to watch on the telly once my son's in bed, but that wouldn't really be what I'd call self-care for me. So it was a struggle. So what I ended up doing was I stopped working on a Friday to allow me to have some opportunity during the shorter school day for some self-care. However, that then stopped because I changed hours and things and moved around how I was working and started working like sort of simultaneously 2 jobs and changed things around. So at the moment now, I probably have less opportunity for self-care, but I am going out on Friday. So, woohoo.
Yay!
So yeah, so I'm
Exciting.
actually, I haven't been out for a while, but what sometimes I can manage is sometimes my son is at a club, say a youth club, and when he's there, it's an hour and a half. And what I have done a couple of times is met a friend that's local and we've just gone and walked their dog in that time. So then that is that self-care. So it's just trying to fit it in when you can. And sometimes it might just be something a lot smaller than what you'd like. And that's what I'm just trying to sort of focus on. But yeah, but this Friday, my parents are babysitting. Although I do have to then be up mega early the next day because my son has a competition for an event that he's doing. And thankfully, there's two families going and the other mum is driving this time. So that's good. Just because it's a really early start, as in like before 6 a.m.
Oh, why? So, Alex, what support, whether that's kind of formal or informal, has made the biggest difference for you, do you think, over your time together as a family?
Oh, so I have support from post adoption in Adoption Focus. So Jess is, because she's therapeutic support worker is her title, isn't it?
She is indeed.
A mouthful.
Yeah.
So Jess has been really helpful because there's been lots of meetings with schools, professionals, now the new school, and sorting out support and things. And it's been really helpful having kind of, I suppose, someone like back in your corner, more like for me, has been really helpful and useful. And then my son's transfer over to our local authority was delayed, which was a good reason. So somebody from his authority, place and authority, is that what they're called?
Yeah.
So they're still tail end, but slightly been involved, and they have been like really helpful as well because they've sort of helped with like organising different bits of support and things, and just a very calming presence. And also have met my son as well, and sort of helped him through some things that had to be discussed.
What role does the adoption community play in support for you, Alex, if any?
So there is a Facebook group that is like, well, there's quite a few different Facebook groups that for aimed at adopters. There's one for single adopters, and do sometimes speak in that group, or message, because you don't really speak, do you? It's all text. And there is Adoption UK have like a solo adopters monthly meetup, so I do go to that sometimes, and I've sort of met a few different solo adopters around the sort of UK through that, some of which we talk more frequently than the others, because I think sometimes you kind of understand each other's situation a little bit more in some ways. But then I've sort of met a couple more local adopters as well. Not all those single adopters, but there's sort of another Facebook group that's called You've Adopted What Now, and I'm in that group, and I do find that you can get some helpful tips and advice. But I think you've just got to pick. I think it's always helpful to be on a Facebook group, but pick the right group for you. So I've been in many different ones to float about, see what I think, and sometimes I may have promptly left or left for whatever reasons, because not everybody has the same view and not everybody likes things that you may or may not say, or if you've met your child in a different way than them, because some people, they're matched because that's their sort of authority or agency says. Others may find a child on Linkmaker, but then you may meet your child at an activity day.
So if you can cast your mind back, Alex, right, what questions do you think prospective adopters should be asking themselves, thinking about in terms of anything, whether it be work or routine or lifestyle? What things should they be considering before starting the process?
I think, so things that they need to sort of consider, I would say expect the unexpected. And also, when you get to secondary, everything's going to change again. You may notice that. I think that's an important thing. Also, if you are adopting a child over 5, you'll need to think about the fact that they're used to their current surname, and that will, when it changes and the adoption order goes through, that could be a considerable amount of time. And also, they've already started school with one name, and they may or may not want to change their name, or they may want to change it sooner and be frustrated because they haven't got the name that they want. So that can be actually really tricky. And as well, with them in particular being older, when you go to medical appointments and people don't have the right information or question my things that you should be thinking about is doing your research. I definitely speak to people that have adopted older children, because it is different. I know I haven't adopted a younger child, but it is different. But you know, don't let it put you off, but just be prepared. But as with any child, you know, life changes, but the older the child, I think the more the likelihood that there is trauma and attachment issues. And I think something that I think is good for a lot of adopters to be aware of is be prepared for birth family to be a part of your life, because your child's got a significant, especially, you know, if they're 5 or older, that's a significant period of their life where they may have spent it with, it could be birth family or it could be foster carer. It just depends on the different situations, but it's going to be different. And I think it's just being mindful that you may end up having an extended family in a different way than you thought, or it could be that your child isn't that bothered about siblings and things, but say in my situation with my son, where he lived with siblings for time with birth family and also during some of his time in care. So for him, siblings are really important and something that there's needed to have time spent on. And I think that's, and even siblings that he hasn't lived with, to him are still really important, and he just wants to know that they're okay and they're safe. But the thing you've got is that what's right for your child may not be right for the other children and the other siblings that could be in different situations. And I wouldn't let it put you off either about siblings or contact, as long as it's safe for when people are like not in care, or, you know, without giving too much details, you know, you can still have relationships with family members that are from birth family where there isn't social services involved as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does, Alex. Thank you. And one last question for you. If you could give one piece of advice to someone about to start the journey, what would it be?
I think it would be, I think I said it already, but expect the unexpected and just be prepared for be prepared for everything to change. Like, don't go in it thinking that, oh, having a child won't change me, because it absolutely will. But I would still say go for it, but just make sure you get as much information as you can. And if you're not sure, go to an information evening, have a meeting with a social worker, find out the things that you need to do, because there's nothing wrong in doing that. In fact, I did do that because I knew I needed to make changes, but I didn't know everything that I would have needed. So I did that, and it was really helpful. And then I didn't actually start the process for another few years because I needed to change jobs and not have a job where I did antisocial hours and things. So I did all of that, and I think that's actually really helpful. So go to the events and find out more and look into it. Because it'll only give you more knowledge and probably make you a better prospect. And you can't have any skeletons in your closet either, so just be open and honest.
No, you can't.
That's what I found.
Thank you, Alex. It's been so lovely chatting with you. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this conversation with Alex. Her openness about the challenges and the joys of adopting an older child highlights just how complex and meaningful this journey can be.